arrive into the east of England, staying mild in many places, but brighter skies start to emerge in Northern Ireland, South Wales and South West England, albeit with a few showers, and colder air is pushing in here. We say goodbye to the rain, finally, from northeast Scotland overnight, but the next batch of showers or rain moves through by the early hours, pushing into Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest during Friday evening, and then into parts of Scotland, central England, by dawn on Saturday. With all of that weather going on, it's going to be a mild start to the weekend, but not as mild as it has been, and it's a bright enough start in East Anglia and the southeast, but the rain is moving through here quite quickly, and it also clears through parts of Scotland by the afternoon. It's replaced by sunny spells and blustery showers across all parts on Saturday. Sunday sees more widespread wind and rain, and it turns colder.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To The Point.
Hi there, very good evening. It's 8 p.m. on Brazier Tonight. As Poland talks of doubling its armed forces to meet the threat from Russia, I'll be talking to the former head of the British Army. The MOD was the only department to face cuts in the budget yesterday. A Liverpudlian who claimed a Scouse imitation of him was discriminatory has lost his tribunal case. Andrew Doyle is here to take you through that. And the people of North Wales, who voted overwhelmingly to retain a statue that campaigners insisted was inappropriate. All that's coming up, but first, a news update with Polly.
Colin, thank you. And here is your GB News update this hour. The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has confirmed the last 7 countries remaining on the UK's red list will be removed from next Monday. That means Peru, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Colombia, Haiti, Panama and Venezuela will no longer face the toughest travel restrictions. Previously, those arriving in the UK from red destinations had to spend 10 days in a quarantine hotel. However, Mr Shapps says the red list category itself will remain in place as a precautionary measure. The Welsh Government says it'll adopt the same changes. The mother of 2 sisters who were killed by a teenager has vowed to stop him ever being released from prison. 19-year-old Daniel Hussein fatally stabbed Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman last June after he said he'd made a pact with the devil. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years. The Met Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, apologised after an independent report found the force's initial response was below the standard it should have been. Mina Smallman paid tribute to her daughters after sentencing.
I think you've heard me say in the past there'll be no celebrations here, but justice has been done. But I think we do need to review that kind of separation. When is someone an adult? And I think it's very disrespectful to say that children can't tell the difference between good and evil.
The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, has summoned the French ambassador after France threatened to impose sanctions on British fishing vessels after a trawler was detained. The French authorities say 2 British ships were fined during checks off the coast of Le Havre yesterday. It's the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. The Environment Secretary, George Eustace, says threats to block and tighten checks on British boats from French ports could be in breach of international law. A 36-year-old man who sent a malicious email to the Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has been spared jail. Benjamin Iliff was sentenced to 15 weeks in prison, but it was suspended for 18 months. During his sentencing, the court was told that Iliff had felt angry after Rayner's use of the term Tory scum at the Labour Party conference. Following the verdict, Miss Rayner posted on Facebook saying she'll continue to speak her mind but be more careful about the language she uses. You're right up to date. Now back to Brazier.
Well, which is the greater threat to your way of life? Global warming or the nuclear missiles which Russia has the means to target many British cities with still? I asked the question in the light of the stories today suggesting that one of our NATO allies is sufficiently worried about Moscow's military intentions that it's considering a doubling in the size of its standing army. But while the talk in Poland is of enlarged expenditure on armed forces, in Britain, the generals here, they're taking stock of what the budget, yesterday's budget, means for them. As is often the way, it's only the day after the budget when the headlines fade, the dust settles, and the fine details really emerge with great clarity. And with that, perhaps, the dawning realisation that for all yesterday's statement by Rishi Sunak meant increased spending, there was one department which is facing cuts, the Ministry of Defence. In real terms, so after inflation, Britain's defence budget will see a day-to-day decrease in departmental spending of 1.4% until 2024-25. The British Army, if you need reminding, is already facing a reduction that will take it to its smallest size in some 300 years. Well, joining me now, the former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannett. Lord Dannett, thanks again for your time. Do appreciate it. I mean, I'm guessing when you were running things at the MOD, at least on behalf of the Army, looking at the way budgets worked was a big part of your job. It meant a lot. And we'll get people saying here that, OK, on the big ticket items, a frigate here, aircraft there, well, the money's been set aside, 16 billion for that. But in terms of the day-to-day spending, which comes from a different pot, it seems to be falling.
Yes, I mean, it's a difficult one, this one, for the government. I mean, clearly we all know the fiscal background which the Chancellor's had to deal with. The job of any government is to make choices, is to allocate priorities. And at the present moment, they're choosing not to prioritise particularly highly defence. Now, I suppose the government would say that a year or so ago, they put an extra, well, you can argue the amount, 16.5 billion, maybe it's 24 billion, those sort of figures into defence over the next few years. And they would argue that the defence budget is growing. But so are the threats to our security. And there is a real balance to be taken here. All three services would say that they need additional funding. The Navy and the Royal Air Force, by tradition, are very capital intensive as far as expenditure is concerned on ships and aircraft. And the Army is expensive, yes, partly with equipment, but more so in terms of manpower. And when budgets have been squeezed, as they have been in recent years, our capital expenditure on ships and aircraft has been by and large maintained, although the admirals and air marshals would argue that that's insufficient. But the cuts have come in the size of the army because manpower is expensive. It's not just pay, it's pensions, it's all the overhead costs of soldiers, which, as you said in your introduction, means that we're looking at an army that's never been as small in recent history as it's likely to be. So this is an issue that the government has got to deal with, and governments have to decide to take risk, to carry risk, and I think we just hope and pray that those risks don't come to bite us at some point in the future. It's difficult it's difficult to foresee the future, but some aspects, particularly as you reported about Poland and on our eastern frontier, not looking very very attractive.
No, we'll come on to that in a second, but just in terms of that day-to-day spending, you mentioned salaries, pensions, but presumably when you're talking about individuals, training is a big part of that budget as well. And there's a feeling that the British Army's not been getting all the training in the situations that it may face that it needs.
Well, again, you were right in your introduction. Expenditure falls broadly into two categories: capital expenditure and running cost expenditure. I've already mentioned that part of running cost is pay and pensions for people, but also it's the fuel, it's the ammunition, it's everything that you need to be active, to be able to train. Because, of course, an Army, Navy or an Air Force, if they're not actually on operations at any one given time, they need to be training to be prepared for operations. And if there is insufficient money, which translates, as I say, into fuel and ammunition and everything else that needs to make an exercise happen, then your training standards decline and your readiness declines, and therefore, on an inverse way, the security of this country is at a rather reduced level. And of course, the other point I would just throw in is that the Chancellor has announced, and in many ways it's much to be welcomed, that the public sector pay cap is to be removed and the pay freeze is to be removed. So we will assume that soldiers, sailors, airmen and marines will receive a pay rise next year. Where's that money coming from? It's not coming from extra money from the Treasury. It has to come from within the Army, Navy and Air Force budget. So that's an increase of pressure on the running costs, and it exacerbates the problem. So you're right to draw attention this evening to the difficulties in defence, and I'm no apologist for the government as far as this is concerned, but they've got to make some big handful decisions on what their highest priorities are, and at the present moment, defence is rather lower down the pecking order. Now, generals, admirals and air marshals would say that's not good enough, but that's what the government is paid to do.
It is, and in making those rationing decisions, they've got to set their decisions in a context that's not just the context of overall government spending in this country, but what's happening elsewhere. And when we look at that NATO target, 2% minimum GDP going towards defence, I think something like 9 of all the NATO countries are making that target right now. I mentioned the Poles earlier because for them there's a clear and present danger close by their borders, isn't there? Which is why they are talking, and it's talking at this stage, according to reports, of a major expansion in their armed forces.
Well, again, if I was the Polish Prime Minister, I would be thinking much along the same lines. And why? Well, Poland has a common border, a long common border with Russia, and a horrible history as far as incursions from Russia, and dare I say it, in these Euro-friendly times, previous incursions from Germany. So Poland, if anyone's interested in history in Poland, they'd actually realise that history hasn't treated them very well in the last 100 years. So if I was the Polish Prime Minister and I was concerned about what Vladimir Putin was doing, yes, I would be thinking about increasing my defence expenditure, which is why, in the context of NATO, the British Armed Forces and the British Army in particular has been making a number of deployments as part of a NATO stance onto the borders of Eastern Europe to show to the Russians, actually, we do mean business. So we have to stand as an alliance with our Polish friends, as we do with our friends in the Baltics, all of whom are very close to Russia. And what's coming out of Russia is quite concerning. So you can't blame the Poles for thinking about what's apparently reported that they're going to do.
No, you can blame, I suppose, our own government for deciding that it's more important to spend 0.7% of GDP on foreign aid, and the intention is to get back to 0.7% of GDP, about 15-16 billion pounds by 2024, 2025. I mean, I had an MP in here last night who was saying, well, in my Blackpool South constituency, the idea of spending money on foreign aid goes down very badly indeed. But you could equally make the argument for saying, why are we cutting the army to its smallest level for 300 years when we're spending billions of pounds on foreign aid? I mean, I know there's an argument that says soft power ultimately means you don't have to apply hard power. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I stand on that I think that it was a mistake to reduce from 0.7 to 0.5% of GDP our spending on overseas aid, because it's not just a debate between hard power and soft power. If the United Kingdom, in the post-Brexit world in which we are now, wants to have influence in the world, we need to harmonise our diplomatic skills with our defence capability and our development budget. Now, harmonising those three together has a chance of really getting the UK influence in the world. And just put quite simply, if we can see a failed or failing state that we can intervene in from a financial point of view and help that country build up its capability, both its economy, its social structure and its defence capability, then we might prevent it becoming a victim to a jihadist or some kind of other intervention into which we then have to make an expensive intervention. So it's an old adage to say prevention is better than cure, but the aid budget is a major significant player into prevention being better than cure, and cure is expensive, particularly when it's down to the blood and lives of soldiers, sailors, airmen and marines.
Lord Dannatt, appreciate your time and your thoughts. Thanks very much. Borrowing to buy a home is about to get more expensive. Within hours of the budget, a string of lenders increased the cost of a mortgage in anticipation of a hike in interest rates to combat soaring inflation. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says inflation and tax rises will leave middle-income earners worse off next year, and the tax burden will be at its highest since the 1950s. Joining me, Harry Fone from the Taxpayers Alliance to reflect on that tax burden. Harry, the highest since the 1950s. Your friends on the Tory backbenches who make the case for lower taxes seem to be losing the argument comprehensively.
Unfortunately, I think you are correct. I mean, this is something the Taxpayers Alliance has been talking about for a good few years now, and it is quite staggering that a Conservative government that sort of talks a good game about lower taxes and building the economy, based on what we've seen from the budget yesterday, the tax burden is scheduled to reach a 73-year high by 2023-24. So the level of taxation as a percentage under GDP will be higher under Boris Johnson than someone like Clement Attlee. So not since we've seen till, after World War II, when there was the massive expansion of the public sector and the state. And I think the worrying thing is that the Conservative Party seems to have lost control or doesn't seem to understand anymore that actually by reducing taxes and reducing the burden on hardworking people, that is how we grow the economy, because people just don't just save their money when they get it. They save some, sure, but they spend it. They spend it in businesses in their local high streets. And if they have less money to do so, then those businesses are going to suffer. It has a knock-on effect, and we're not going to see that sort of post-COVID boom that Boris and Rishi are always talking up.
Well, the thing is, Harry, that post-COVID boom is vital, isn't it? If those Office for Budget Response, the OBR predictions on growth aren't met, if we don't get the growth, was it 6.5%? I mean, it sounds pretty ambitious. Then presumably taxes will have to rise further than we're talking about here.
Well, I mean, the 6.5% is just in the sort of in the next year or so. If you look further down the line, it's only going to be about 1.3%, which, when you consider that inflation could well be above that, is it really growth at all? And I don't think there's much headroom actually now left, for more tax rises. I mean, we're probably not that far away that if I came on next year, we'd be saying, the tax burden's at a 75 or 80-year high, maybe. And then actually you're going to start to see that because people have so little income that's disposable, that actually you're going to start to see a contraction of the economy. We might not even see, 0.5% growth, and that's not good for anyone. And I think this is what sort of angers me, is that politicians look at this in a very sort of linear way. They say if we increase taxes, we'll get X amount in, but they never seem to think, well, if we decrease them, yes, just in a two-dimensional way, the tax take will go down. But what about all the benefits that come as a result of that? Because I speak to people all over the country who they say, they're working hard and they're not seeing the fruits of their labour. They're having their hard-earned money taken out of their pockets. And if that wasn't the case, this is money that would be going into local high street businesses all across the country, and we would see, I believe, those much higher growth than they're predicting right now. You cannot tax your way into prosperity, and I know it's my understanding the Conservative Party used to understand that. I mean, the Labour Party is not in power at the moment, but it very much seems that their policies are in power.
There was a moment yesterday, Harry, when Rishi Sunak made the point. I'm guessing you would have liked this at the Taxpayers Alliance. That, we shouldn't be talking about public money or government money. It's taxpayers' money. And just for a moment, I thought we were getting somewhere, but then that seemed to be snuffed out at that stage. This idea that government really owes it to the taxpayers. I mean, your organisation, if you could galvanise the grumbling out there from people when taxes go up, you'd be one of the biggest membership organisations in the land. But yet nobody's taking this on. Nobody's sort of saying, maybe we should start with the budget, with the entire chamber applauding the taxpayers, for giving up their hard-won cash in such gigantic quantities. I don't know, when somebody pays £1 million worth of tax, send them a letter of thanks. That idea that this is a compact between the government and the taxpayer, it will seem to a lot of people that the taxpayers' interest, that even the word taxpayers is being airbrushed from the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, it was encouraging what Rishi Sunak said, but then seemed to do the complete opposite by digging ever deeper into taxpayers' pockets. And it's not their money, it's our money. And I was probably slightly unfair to Labour actually by saying the Tories are adopting their policies, because actually Labour have been pretty good on this. They've been saying that they've called out wasteful spending. They've also said that things like the recent national insurance increase are going to hit those on the lowest incomes. And it's a very odd sort of political positionings going on at the moment. And one wonders actually how much Rishi Sunak believes this, because he sort of says his instincts to lower taxes. Well, we'll do it. This is what's going to help the economy grow. And I think what angers me and many people I speak to, with this sort of cost of living crisis that we're seeing, Rishi Sunak, he was talking about over the course of Parliament that public spending will have increased by about £150 billion, mainly paid for through taxation and probably to some extent some borrowing. Why is he not seeking to make savings in government? Why is he not seeking to ramp up efficiencies? I mean, just last year, the Taxpayers Alliance did what would be a relatively brief but fairly extensive investigation into wasteful spending in the public sector. And just scratching the surface, we found £6 billion of waste. Now, probably if you dive deeper, there's tens of billions of pounds of waste. So why is it always the recourse of the government, and in this case, the Conservative government, that's saying, no, we're going to ask more of taxpayers? Why are they not looking at actually cutting spending or getting more efficiencies from our departments to get the world-class services that taxpayers are paying an absolute fortune for, but not getting, quite frankly?
Well, I think we know what's coming, don't we? Tax cuts towards the ends of this Parliament before a general election. That used to happen a lot. It looks like it's about to happen again. Harry Fohn from the Taxpayers Alliance, thanks very much. Well, this evening, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, she tweeted, and she said she was summoning the French ambassador to explain what she's called France's, quote, disappointing and disproportionate threats made against the UK and Channel Islands. This is daft stuff, isn't it? It follows an extraordinary interview by France's Europe Minister in which he said the British only, quote, understood the language of force after French coastal authorities seized a British trawler. Clement Beaune promised to take a zero-tolerance approach against Britain in the escalating dispute over post-Brexit fishing rights. This is the trawler at the centre of the dispute. The Cornelis Gurjan was held yesterday off Le Havre as France pledged to ban all British vessels from landing catches from next week. In retaliation, they say, for the government's decision not to grant more fishing licences to French trawlers in British waters. And in the past few minutes, the Cabinet Minister, Lord Frost, he of the Brexit negotiations, in charge of talks with Brussels, Lord Frost has tweeted that he remains concerned about France's actions, and he's added he'll have more to say on the issue tomorrow. That's a story that's going to be around for a while and may go who knows where. We'll bring every twist as it happens. Now, it's time for the Brazier Angle. The Cambridge University Dictionary defines gesture politics thus: any action by a person or organisation done for political reasons and intended to attract public attention but having little real effect. In a moment we'll come back to that quote. just park it for now. But first, the reason I mention it at all. If you're a cricket fan, you'll have heard of Quinton de Kock, one of the world's most gifted wicket-keeper batsmen. His career has been hanging in the balance for the last 48 hours, not because of an injury, but a decision he took on Tuesday. He was sitting on a coach heading for a stadium in Dubai and a T20 World Cup match against the West Indies. In previous fixtures, he'd stood to attention as a mark of commitment to anti-racism, but on Tuesday, the men who administer South African cricket decided that was not enough. The players had to take the knee. No debate, no discussion, no forewarning, no dissension. If a player now wanted to represent his nation, he could skip singing the national anthem, but he had to take the knee. Well, at the time, Quinton de Kock didn't elaborate on his one-man boycott, but today, an astonishing statement, really, a cri de coeur for free speech, a heartfelt rejection of the increasingly dominant view that there is only one way to express disapproval of racism, and that is by taking the knee. The wicketkeeper reminded everyone that he comes from a mixed-race family, that he's got a black stepmother, and that he is emphatically not a racist. He wrote, "I didn't understand why I had to prove it with a gesture when I live and learn and love people from all walks of life every day. When you're told what to do with no discussion, it felt like it takes away the meaning. If I was a racist, I could easily have taken the knee and lied, which is wrong and doesn't build a better society." Well, in this, de Kock echoes the words of other sportsmen who refused to be swept up by prevailing orthodoxy. Last year, QPR's director of football, Les Ferdinand, said taking the knee was an increasingly empty gesture. So de Kock is not the first person in sport to point out that taking the knee does not somehow magically purge an individual of racism, but he might be the first professional athlete to be placed in a moral cleft stick, with no choice but to go along with something he conscientiously objects to, for reasons, by the way, that he keeps to himself, for fear of losing his livelihood. To put this into context, de Kock is 28, his partner is pregnant, and he can confidently expect to earn millions over the next 5 or so years. But from that moment on Tuesday, when he didn't take to the pitch, that financial security was thrown into doubt. Questions were immediately raised about whether he'd ever play for South Africa again. Well, more ruinously, de Kock is one of many cricketers made a millionaire by playing in India, and by yesterday it began to look like he might be expelled from that gold mine. Who could blame de Kock, a man who has bent his life around cricket, for staring into the abyss of obscurity and deciding to take a pace backwards? In his statement today, he said he was sorry for all the fuss he'd caused and would now take the knee if it would help. Will that save his career? Well, maybe. But for many people, what's happened to de Kock will sound like compulsion. For a gesture of solidarity to have any power and legitimacy, it must be voluntary, surely. There has to be a choice. Otherwise, it becomes an order. And to go back to where we started, it becomes an expression of gesture politics at best, authoritarianism at worst. Cricket South Africa insists that by demanding players take the knee, they are enforcing unity, an odd word that to use for an institution which champions diversity. We still don't know why de Kock has never taken the knee. In his statement today, there were perhaps clues. He said that black lives have mattered since I was born, but he pointedly avoided any mention of BLM, the movement. For a minority of people, BLM seems to be a Marxist organisation, and taking the knee is tainted by association. We have no idea if that's why de Kock didn't take the knee, but what business, frankly, is it really of ours? He's paid to play cricket. We pay to watch him play cricket. We have not bought tickets to peer into the man's soul. That's the Brazier angle. Well, after the break, the Satanic murderer sentenced to 35 years. We'll bring you that story. But first, for a decade, in fact, we will take a break now. We'll bring you that story next.
On Tonight Live, it's Mark Dolan in for Dan Wootton. In the clash, should we scrap foreign aid? Darren Grimes on the government's green agenda, just who pays? And former business secretary in the coalition government, the man who predicted the credit crunch, Vince Cable is my special guest at 10. In Uncancelled, we'll speak to a former top Donald Trump advisor about Joe Biden's tax hike on the American super rich. And in my monologue, Sorry, Patrick Vallance, but you don't decide how much meat goes on our dinner plates. See you at 9.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Well, for the best part of a decade, a bronze statue of H.M. Stanley has stood proudly in Denbigh in North Wales. He was the explorer who famously found a missing missionary in what is now Tanzania and exclaimed with some Victorian understatement, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." But in the wake of the BLM movement in America, there's been a campaign to have the statue removed, following accusations that his activities in Africa were cruel and racist. Well, the town council decided to resolve the question with a vote, and the results, a crushing defeat for the statue topplers. Of the 600 votes, 471 voted in favour of retaining the bronze. Some 121 voted for its removal. Let's turn to Nick Elphick, the man behind the sculpture of H.M. Stanley. Nick Elphick, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Do appreciate it. Were you surprised by the strength of feeling caused by this and ultimately the vote?
Was I surprised? I mean, I got to the point now where I completely and utterly believed he was coming down. So many rumours had come to me that he was going to be restored. I'd actually priced for the council to have him removed just in case the vote came in. And even, people I'd spoken to in the council were completely worried but believed he was coming down. So, and I actually said to a friend of mine last night, he's definitely come down. She said to me, yes. And I got home last night.
Oh, Nick, I do apologise. We've got some problems with the sound and we've tried to persevere, but it's not working, I'm afraid. Maybe we'll try and get it fixed for a little later on. Let's change tack and tell you about a man who murdered two sisters in a random attack, has been jailed for life. This is the story of Daniel Hussein, will serve a minimum of 35 years in prison. The 19-year-old murdered sisters Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman after making a satanic blood pact. Our Home and Security editor Mark White reports now from the Old Bailey.
Armed with taser stun guns, the moment police move in to arrest killer Daniel Hussein.
Mate, you're under arrest. Come out the address. Keep walking towards me. Stay where you are, stay where you are. Hands on your head, stay where you are. Face me. Hands on your head, stay where you are. You're under arrest, all right?
He is, it's clear, completely unfazed. A cold, callous young man who just weeks earlier murdered two sisters in a frenzied knife attack. Part, we're told, of a bizarre pact with the devil. This is one of the last images of Hussein's victims, Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman. a selfie taken by them minutes before they were murdered. The sisters had been with a group of friends on the 5th of June last year, celebrating Biba's birthday. As the friends drifted off home, Biba and Nicole stayed on in the Friant Country Park, dancing late into the night, until coming face to face with their killer, who stabbed them dozens of times. Their bodies were discovered almost 2 days later by Nicole's boyfriend, as family and friends launched their own search for the missing sisters, frustrated by the slow police response. After the police watchdog this week criticised that initial response as below standard, Scotland Yard Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family. It is yet another deeply uncomfortable moment for the Met boss.
I've never been one to cast a whole organisation by one particular sort of incident, but we do have a problem. We do have an underground that has infiltrated and growing in our Met Police. But once again, I want to say thank you to this team that worked tirelessly to find the killer. The hours that they put in, and you know when someone's just doing a job and when they're invested. Well, so many people have become invested in this story.
No.
In police custody, Hussein still had injuries to his right hand, deep cuts he sustained while stabbing Biba and Nicole.
Is this the interview? That's the question. The injuries on your fingers. What happened there?
Detectives pieced together his movements on the night of the murders. This is him arriving back at his father's house near the park. His blood-stained trousers removed, the injured hand tucked into the jacket tied around his waist. The blood from that injured hand was found all over the crime scene. This is Daniel Hussein in an Asda supermarket in the days before the murders, buying the block of knives he'd go on to use in the attack. And in a search of his mother's home, police uncovered a far more sinister aspect to this crime: Satanic symbols in his bedroom. And nearby, a handwritten letter. It was a deal with the devil, a promise to kill 6 women every 6 months. It was signed in his own blood. In return, he believed he'd win the lottery and have better luck with women. Search teams even found receipts for lottery tickets purchased in the days after the murders. It's not known why the sisters were targeted. This is Biba and Nicole in a local co-op buying food and drink shortly before heading to Friant Park. Tragically, they may simply have been in the wrong place at the wrong time when Hussein discovered them. As horrific as these murders undoubtedly were for the sisters' family and friends, there is the added trauma, not just of the initial lacklustre police response, but in learning that 2 officers who should have been guarding the scene were arrested and then later charged with taking selfies next to the bodies. Those 2 officers are due to appear at the Old Bailey next week. Their lawyers have indicated they intend to plead guilty. But for now, Daniel Hussein is beginning life behind bars for the murder of Biba and Nicole, 2 sisters who'd simply been relishing life and celebrating their freedom from lockdown. Mark White, GB News at the Old Bailey.
After the break, is ribbing somebody for being a Scouser discriminatory? Andrew Doyle will be here.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Well, as we were just told you a few moments ago, a man who murdered two sisters in a random attack has been jailed for life. This is the story of Daniel Hussein. He'll serve a minimum of 35 years. Let's turn to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who was at the sentencing hearing today at the Old Bailey. Mark, you mentioned in your report just before the commercial break that this is something which may cause political difficulties ultimately for Cressida Dick. I mean, there'll be people saying now's not the time to discuss something like this in the wake of such an horrific crime in the sentencing, but it is certainly something that's been actively discussed.
Yeah, I think there is no doubt it is going to be very difficult for Cressida Dick in the next week in particular, when two police officers who should have been guarding the murder scene were instead later arrested, having apparently and allegedly taken selfies of themselves next to the bodies. They've been charged with misconduct in public office and are appearing at the Old Bailey next Tuesday. Now, Mina Smallman, the mother of the two murdered sisters, was in court today, spoke outside court. You've got to feel for her. She had to come to terms with this most horrific of crimes. How on earth can you ever really come to terms knowing the full depravity of this individual, Daniel Hussein? But of course, she's also had to absorb that news of what could well be, if they plead guilty, as they are expected to do, a betrayal by those officers who were supposed to guard and look after those two young girls as they lay dead in that field in northwest London. Add to that, of course, the criticism there was over the initial police response. The Independent Office for Police Conduct criticised Scotland Yard for a lacklustre, slow response that was below the acceptable level. The Met Commissioner tried to apologise to Mina Smallman, but she didn't want to accept that apology when it was offered a couple of days back. And I think, she is saving her sort of powder, if you like, keeping her powder dry for Tuesday. And if these officers plead guilty, there is no doubt that she will be very critical. She didn't want to be too critical of the Metropolitan Police as a whole today, because she wanted to praise in particular the actions of the murder investigation team, who she said had gone above and beyond to try to bring the killer of her daughters to justice. But she will have much harsher words about the Metropolitan Police and the way that it is run after the hearing on Tuesday of next week.
Mark, just a thought before you go, and I suppose it's the case for the defence, if you like, for Cressida Dick, that here is somebody who has been in charge of a force that, like other forces in the UK, has seen budgets cut, number of police officers reduced, experienced officers leaving as well, lots of new officers, often inexperienced, coming in. And actually, a police force, like many institutions, which to a degree reflects the nature of society at large, and to blame one individual for its manifold failings as well as its successes, it will strike some people as unfair.
I think there are plenty of people, especially within the Metropolitan Police, who will agree completely with the premise that you put to me. She is very popular amongst many officers within the Metropolitan Police Service. They feel that she does really have their backs, and that actually the behaviour of a reprehensible few is something that, you know, she can't really control at the end of the day. However, she is the boss, the ultimate figurehead of that force, and when there are constant failings that come to light, and we have seen it, of course, with Sarah Everard, the fallout over the murder of Sarah Everard by one of her own officers. There are other active cases that we can't go into a great deal of detail about at the moment, of other officers who have been charged with rape and are going through the court process. It is a difficult time for Cressida Dick, but it is a difficult job. It is, without a doubt, the most political of police chief postings in the whole of the country, because you are dealing with a huge degree of politics in that post as well. You're dealing, of course, on one hand with the Home Secretary, who's your boss, with one set of priorities, and a London Mayor, on the other hand, with who's also your boss, with a often completely different set of priorities. Lots of politics in this job, a big force of more than 30,000 individuals there. And, you know, there are some individuals who are absolutely bad eggs, and that reflects badly on the person, of course, who is in ultimate charge, even if she had nothing to do with the crime itself.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark White there. It's time for our Culture Clash segment now. And a professor who was called a transphobe by students who tried to get her sacked subsequently has resigned. This is big news in this field. Kathleen Stock quit her job at the University of Sussex earlier today. Andrew Doyle, host of Free Speech Nation, has been following the recent ups and downs and fortunes of Kathleen Stock closely. Did you expect it to go?
I didn't, actually, insofar as the university had stood up for her rights and had actually said it is not acceptable to harass and bully and attack and intimidate a member of staff when they are simply exercising their academic freedom. And let's not forget what it is she's actually said. She said that biological sex is a reality. And the irony of all of this is that if you actually read Kathleen Stock's latest book, Material Girls, or if you read anything she's written about this subject, she is one of the most compassionate and calm and placid voices in this debate. You know, the way that she's been depicted is, well, I say depicted, mischaracterised, frankly. But I thought because the university, and particularly the Vice-Chancellor, had stood up for her and said that, you know, this is not acceptable, the ones that actually supported the idea that she should be sacked, weirdly enough, was the union. So the academics union, who, of course, should be the ones who were standing up for her.
Not the students' union, the academics union.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is the thing. So I didn't expect, I think it's very sad, but I understand it. I mean, you know, once you have experienced those kind of things, this has been very hard on Kathleen Stock and her family. There's been a lot of pressure. When you are sort of the subject, the centre of this storm, it can be very difficult. And going back to work in those conditions, I imagine, would be very difficult to do.
It's worth making the point, isn't it, that oftentimes people who go into academia, you know, they're cerebral folk. They prefer a library to, you know, a debating chamber like the House of Commons. They've chosen a particular course, haven't they?
Yeah.
And it's not to be confrontational, it's to be contemplative.
Yeah, I suppose it depends which teaching staff you're thinking of in particular, but you're right. Most of them are not combative by nature. And she's not written about this subject in order to provoke, to stir up a fight. She is reacting to a reality of our time, a discourse of our time that requires further debate and discussion, not less. You know, if anything, the hostility and toxicity around the debate has been heightened and exacerbated precisely because people aren't talking about it. And instead they just threaten and mudsling, and it's not good enough. So it is a shame that it's happened, but maybe it was inevitable.
Yeah. On the discourse you were talking about, we'll flick onto this story, which I think is pretty astonishing, really. It's in a similar vein. Canada, that's where some schools have started to remove supposedly harmful books from schools. And in particular, A Handmaid's Tale, come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just one school, by the way. I mean, this is there's an article the other day about the Waterloo Region District School Board. Margaret Atwood herself retweeted the article about this.
Author.
Yes, exactly. And The Handmaid's Tale, of course, you would think of this as a great sort of work of modern feminist literature. But that has been removed from a number of schools in Canada, and the article talks about that because of outdated tropes, or what they describe as misogynistic tropes. I mean, this is utterly absurd at this point. The article also talks about how The Lord of the Flies was taken out by Ottawa's school board. And what was fascinating about that is they said that this is William Golding's Lord of the Flies. They say they took it out because of its outdated themes. Well, it was written a while ago, you know, and it also said that one of the themes is white male power structures, right? Well, if you know the novel, you will know that if it is about white male power structures, they're not.
It doesn't go well for Piggy.
They don't come across well, do they? It's not as though it's clearly bolstering this idea. It's a form of kind of historical illiteracy, and the problem is that it's libraries doing it. Now, we were talking the other day, weren't we, about Homerton College in Cambridge, and the archivists there uploading their content to the internet and adding trigger warnings to books like Little House on the Prairie or The Water Babies or Dr. Seuss. And you could say, well, that's just a warning, you know, for parents in case it's kids. It's not. Because they describe this as harmful. They describe these books as harmful, and that's the difference. You know, this shouldn't be compared to, say, the warnings that the BBFC put on films to warn parents about content, because they don't say these films are harmful and can cause real-world harm. Ideologically, these librarians, these archivists, they think that these books are dangerous.
But you know, a book just like The Handmaid's Tale, I mean, I'm not a fan of it particularly, but my teenage daughters, it's a biblical text for young women.
I mean, I taught the book, so you know, I actually think it's a fantastic piece of work, and I think the idea, yeah, I mean, but this is the bizarre thing about it.
But the trans campaigners, by saying actually, no, you need to be suspicious of this book.
Yeah.
Are going to lose potential allies.
Oh, because it's insane. I mean, and to be honest, most trans people would also think this is insane. I've seen a few extreme activists online talking about how The Handmaid's Tale centres the notion of cis heteronormativity, or the idea of you know, women reproducing, and therefore that's somehow problematic. It's a nonsense, and believe me, most trans people would also accept that this is a nonsense. This is not representative of trans people. This kind of thing is representative of extreme activists who have managed to worm their way into libraries of all places. And
what was that phrase you just used, cis what?
So did I say cis heteronormative? Probably.
No, it was brilliant. I mean, given that we went for lunch today, I'm glad that fell to you to say, not me. We've learned today, by the way, that doing a crude imitation of a Liverpudlian to a Liverpudlian is not racist. This after a tribunal ruled that a bus driver's boss was not mocking him when he did an impression of this Harry Enfield sketch, which you may remember.
Come on here then, Terry, do you need a hand or what, eh? It's all right, Alba. I'm just going to knock this fella's lights out, if that's all right with you. Hola. Are you asking me if that's all right? Yeah, I am. What are you going to do about it? Do what I friggin' like. Oh, yeah, come on, then. Come on. Why don't you ask him? He started it.
Calm down, Andrew.
Yeah, so the judge has ruled that that is not racist because it's not racist. You know, so I mean, it's as simple as that, really. Well, actually, what happened? It was a bus driver, a Liverpudlian bus driver in Scotland, and it was the manager who'd actually made the voice and said, "Calm down" in that way, and he saw this as offensive, and he said it was mocking his Englishness, you know, from a Scottish person. Maybe it was. Actually, it sounds like she was mocking him, to be fair. But does this really have to go to court? I mean, he said he was so upset by it that he took 2 days off work and lost his job as a result. So that's why it became complicated. But, you know, is it that? I mean, this is how we resolve things now? I mean, that's just someone poking fun at someone else. And if it has to go to tribunal or court every time that somebody does that, we have no human interaction left anymore, do we? We're just joyless and soulless. And what's the point of that?
That's a bit of a sweeping statement to end your contribution with, Andrew, but I'm not going to disagree with it. Thanks a lot. Now, Westminster has some odd and eye-catching traditions, one of which is its own Dog of the Year show. This year, well, really very poignantly indeed, it went to the French bulldog owned by the late Sir David Amess, who, as you know, was killed last month in Southend. The event, it's run jointly by the Kennel Club and the Dogs Trust. Joining me now, the MP Lee Anderson, one of the parliamentarians who entered a dog in this year's competition. Lee Anderson, thanks so much for your time. I mean, it's an odd one, isn't it?
Yeah, good evening.
So, yes, a lot was said at the time of Sir David's killing and in the days that followed about the warmth of his character and his attachment to to pets and indeed, actually, his contribution to this particular competition.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bittersweet occasion, really, today, Colin. You know, everybody would have, wished that Sir David was there, but he wasn't, so it's incredibly sad. But, his dog, Vivian, a worthy winner. And it was wonderful to see Andrew and my colleague Mark parade Vivian around the green. Let's be honest, was all rooting for Vivian to win, and it was a fitting tribute to the late Sir David. And we have to realise that our animals, our pets, they're wonderful companions, and they need a voice because they can't speak themselves, obviously. And there was no better voice in this country than Sir David.
Striking in some of the pictures we saw of Rishi Sunak scribbling on his notes on his sofa in number 11, dog on the sofa. I mean, sometimes, I'm not for a second suggesting this is true of you, Lee, but I mean, for some politicians, whether they're American presidents or the Chancellor, a dog can feel like a bit of a prop sometimes, an extra.
Well, maybe that's the case, but I mean, I'm sat here with Alfie now. He's 13. He was a rescue dog. We rescued him about 2.5 years ago. His owner couldn't look after him any longer. And I'll tell you what, Colin, it's probably one of the best things I've ever done. He's a wonderful companion. He keeps my wife company when I'm down in Westminster. And he loves us dearly, and we love him. And all we have to do is take him for walks 3 times a day and give him a bit of food. And that's the sort of unconditional love a pet gives you.
It really does. And, I mean, you spend a lot of time in the chamber, don't you? And, I mean, MPs are busy folk. I mean, finding the time just to walk a dog, take care of a dog. I mean, one of the features of that story that's become a hardy perennial during COVID lockdown was, people taking on the responsibility of a dog during lockdown because it's, they were feeling a bit lonely, and then discovering, heaven forfend, that actually they do take up quite a lot of time if you're looking after them properly.
Yes, they do. You have to invest in a lot of time and effort when you own any pet, not just a dog. But the rewards are worth it, Colin. It's great. I take Alfie out on a Monday morning before I go down to Westminster, and the one thing I look forward to when I'm coming home on a Friday is to get his lead on and take him around the field at the back of my house. It's wonderful. They give you so much love. They give you so much comfort, so much friendship, and like I say, the love's unconditional. And, anybody thinking about getting a dog or a pet, you've got to realise that you need that time. But like I say, if you've got the time to invest, then it's well worth it. And especially if you get a rescue dog as well.
Yeah, we're just looking at some of those pictures from College Green. And that is the winner, isn't it? That's the French Bulldog, Vivienne.
Yeah, that's Vivian, a beautiful dog. Got a lot of attention today, and rightly so. We was all rooting for Vivian. I secretly had a little vote for Vivian as well. We all knew she was probably going to win, and we're really happy she did win because, like I say, David was a great voice for animals, a great voice in Parliament, did so much work, over the 40 years he was an MP, a fantastic man, a gentleman, and a great ambassador for the animals in this country.
Lee, over the years, we've had some trouble with dogs in the studio, so I'm absolutely delighted that we're talking today with you some distance away with your dog in your lap. But we very much appreciate talking to you about that lovely story, admittedly with, as you say, a bittersweet angle, that's for sure, as we remember Sir David Amess. Lee Anderson, thanks so much for your time. Much more news coming up next. Mark Dolan's with you. Do stand by.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast. There is further rain for many during the next 24 hours, particularly those areas of northern and western England, southern Scotland, as well as Wales, where we are currently seeing heavy rainfall. And this weather front has stalled during the last couple of days across northern England, southern Scotland. It's finally making some progress south and east, but the focus for heavy rain continues to be Cumbria. Amber warning enforced for the rest of the day, and then increasingly Wales and the southwest. Spells of rain overnight amounting to 40 millimetres widely, 80 millimetres over higher ground, perhaps even more for Snowdonia. Risk of disruption, risk of localised flooding. Drier for East Anglia in the southeast, mild here. Colder for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland as well, with some clear spells overnight. Otherwise, a lot of cloud as we start off the day on Friday. Further spells of wet weather pushing through Wales, moving up into northern England, southern and then eventually central Scotland. The rain across England and Wales turning to showers by the afternoon as they finally arrive into the east of England, staying mild in many places, but brighter skies start to emerge in Northern Ireland, South Wales and South West England, albeit with a few showers, and colder air is pushing in here. We say goodbye to the rain finally from northeast Scotland overnight, but the next batch of showers or rain moves through by the early hours, pushing into Northern Ireland, Wales and the